You wake up at 3 a.m. with a heavy, suffocating fog pressing behind your eyes and a cold ache in your chest that you just can't shake. Your hands tremble as you reach for a glass of water, your own skin feeling like a stranger's. This isn't just today. This hollow exhaustion has been creeping through your bones for months, making you feel like a ghost in your own home. You've tried the vitamins, the extra rest, and the forced smiles, but nothing clears the mist. What if this crushing weight isn't your body failing, but a vital warning your instincts are desperate for you to hear? In the next few minutes, you'll understand what is really happening to you. My name is Arthur William Sterling, a 72-year-old man who built Sterling Logistics from a single rusted truck into a global empire. I spent decades measuring success by the weight of cargo, but now the only weight I feel is the silence of this massive estate. My wife Martha has been gone for 5 agonizing years, leaving behind a void that no amount of wealth can fill. I still carry her favorite pearl brooch in my vest pocket, running my thumb over its smooth surface whenever my temper flares, desperately trying to hear her soft voice calming my soul. My greatest fear isn't death, but becoming a forgotten, useless relic in my own home. My world now revolves around my 34-year-old son, Julian, and my niece, Sarah, a dedicated nurse who remains my only emotional anchor. Every morning at 5, a habit from my trucking days, I sit with a cup of bitter black coffee and watch Martha's garden bloom. I refuse to use tablets, preferring the ink-stained feel of a physical newspaper while the house remains still. Before we continue this journey of betrayal, I want to thank you for being here. Please comment below and let me know where you are watching from. Also, remember that while inspired by true events, certain names and elements have been fictionalized for this dramatic narrative. The morning after Julian's outburst, the library's silence felt heavy, as if the walls were judging my failing memory. I reached for my silver letter opener, but my hand brushed against a heavy blue leather folder hidden under Julian's tech magazines. It was Audit Report 404, a document from Sterling Logistics that should never have been in this house. A yellow sticky note fluttered out, dated April 12, 2025, containing a handwritten sequence of numbers and the word foundation in Julian's aggressive script. I tried to convince myself he was merely being efficient, using corporate resources to manage his charities, but the logic felt hollow. My mind wanted to trust my son, yet my instincts remained uncomfortably alert. Later, while wiping a coffee stain from the desk, I noticed a bank confirmation slip peeking from that same blue folder. The document bore the gold seal of Sterling Logistics, but it was addressed to an offshore entity I never authorized. I squinted at my signature. The loop of the S was too wide, an imperfection I hadn't made since my surgery in 2014. The slip was dated March 15, 2024, a day I spent bedridden with a fever, unable to hold a pen. Coincidence is a luxury I can no longer afford. A cold, unnamed suspicion is now taking root, whispering that my son's calculated anger might be nothing more than a mask for something much darker. I spent the next 3 days moving like a ghost in my own hallways, careful not to let Julian see the fire smoldering behind my tired eyes. I waited until the clock struck midnight on April 30th before returning to the library, my breath hitching as I opened the mahogany drawer where I'd hidden the blue leather folder. Using a magnifying glass I'd kept since my days inspecting cargo manifests, I began cross-referencing the transfer dates with my personal journals. On February 12, 2025, the record showed a $12 million wire transfer to a charity called the Sterling Legacy. Yet my own diary from that exact Tuesday described me suffering from a severe migraine, unable to even lift a fountain pen. The discrepancy wasn't just a clerical error. It was a surgical strike against my legacy that left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I dug deeper into the Audit Report 404, noticing that every single transaction occurred at exactly 2:15 p.m., the precise time I usually took my afternoon nap. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird as I realized the consistency of these thefts required intimate knowledge of my daily vulnerabilities. This wasn't a stranger hacking into a server. This was someone who watched me sleep while they drained my life's work. I felt a cold sweat prickling my neck, a physical manifestation of a truth I was still too terrified to voice aloud. From the shadows of the mezzanine, I watched Julian pace the marble foyer, his hands trembling as he checked his gold watch for the third time in a minute. He was wearing a navy Italian suit that cost more than my first truck, barking orders into his phone about high-risk margins and liquidating assets. The arrogance in his voice was a jagged blade, cutting through the memory of the boy I once taught to play catch. He looked up, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. I saw a flicker of predatory calculation behind his concern. He asked if I had taken my medication, his voice dripping with a fake, oily kindness that made my skin crawl. Realizing I couldn't fight this war alone without losing my mind, I reached out to the only man who knew the Sterling logistics books better than I did. Mr. Henderson, my chief accountant for 32 years, met me at a secluded diner on 5th Street at 6 a.m., far from Julian's prying eyes. Henderson looked older, his face etched with the same weary loyalty that had seen us through the recession of 2008. I slid the blue folder across the Formica table, my hands finally steady now that a professional was involved. He didn't say a word for 10 minutes, his eyes darting across the columns of numbers with a lethal, focused precision that I recognized as the beginning of Julian's end. Henderson looked up, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that sounded like a death sentence being read in a quiet room. He revealed the first layer of the conspiracy. None of the charities listed in the reports had ever received a single dime from the Sterling estate. He had personally called the directors of the foundations, and their records for the fiscal year ending December 2024 showed zero contributions under my name. The $80 million hadn't gone to veterans. It had vanished into a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands under the umbrella of the Sterling legacy. My breath hitched as the weight of the betrayal finally pressed down on my lungs, suffocating my remaining hope. But the rabbit hole went much deeper than a few missing donations, as Henderson tapped a specific line on the third page of the audit. He had traced the digital IP addresses used to authorize the transfers back to a private server located in a luxury penthouse in Chicago. My blood turned to ice when he showed me the deed for that property, purchased on May 12, 2024, for a staggering $9 million in cash. The buyer wasn't a corporation, but a trust managed by Marcus Thorne, Julian's personal attorney. The scale of the theft was massive, moving from a simple family dispute to a calculated criminal enterprise designed to strip me of everything I built over 50 years. As we sat in that dimly lit diner, I felt the phantom pain of Martha's absence, wishing her wisdom could guide me through this labyrinth. Henderson leaned in closer, his expression darkening as he explained that the authorization codes were linked to my private biometric key. This meant that whoever did this had physical access to my thumbprint and my retinal scan while I was incapacitated. I remembered the heavy sedation I felt after my vitamin injections Julian insisted I take last November, a realization that made my stomach churn with nausea. The person I raised was not just stealing my fortune. He was treating my aging body like a tool for his own enrichment. The investigation was no longer just about tracking money. It was about uncovering the depth of a betrayal that felt like a physical assault. Henderson produced a final document, a photocopy of a signature from a wire transfer dated March 15, 2024, the day I was hospitalized. When I looked closely, I saw the slight tremor in the S of Sterling, an exact match for the signature on a birthday card I gave Julian in 2015. He hadn't just forged my name. He had digitally lifted my handwriting from a moment of fatherly affection to facilitate his theft. The irony was a bitter poison, realization dawning that my love provided the very weapons used to destroy me. With the evidence laid out before me, The path forward became a narrow, treacherous bridge between my duty as a father and my search for justice. Henderson warned me that Marcus Thorne and Julian were likely moving the remaining $40 million within 48 hours, leaving us a tiny window to act before the trail went cold. I felt the CEO in me taking command, replacing the heartbroken old man who wanted to believe in second chances. Before we proceed to the moment I decided to strike back, I need to ask you something important. Do you think blood should always come first, or is justice more important than family? Type forgive or justice in the comments right now. Henderson's terminal glowed as we analyzed the digital trail of the Sterling legacy. It wasn't just a simple bank account. It was a complex web of 11 offshore corporations stretching from Panama to the British Virgin Islands. We discovered a wire transfer for $7 million on February 18, 2025, sent to a high-stakes cryptocurrency brokerage in Hong Kong. My son hadn't just stolen my money. He was gambling with it in a desperate attempt to cover losses from a failed Bitcoin venture. The realization that my life's work was being used to fuel a gambling addiction made my vision swim. This wasn't a business strategy. It was the frantic thrashing of a man drowning in his own greed. The deeper we dug into Audit Report 404, the more the name Marcus Thorne appeared like a recurring nightmare. Thorne wasn't just Julian's attorney. He was the architect of a legal cage designed to strip me of my human rights. We found a draft of a petition for involuntary guardianship, dated May 2, 2025, prepared by Thorne's firm. It alleged that I suffered from severe cognitive decline and paranoid delusions, citing my refusal to use modern technology as primary evidence of my mental instability. The cold, legal language turned my own personality traits into symptoms of a disease. They weren't just taking my wealth. They were preparing to legally erase my existence and my voice. My hands shook as I remembered the bitter taste of the tea Julian brought me every afternoon at precisely 3 p.m. I decided to skip my vitamin injection on the morning of May 5th, hiding the syringe in a velvet jewelry box. By noon, the usual fog in my brain lifted, replaced by a sharp, terrifying clarity I hadn't felt in months. I searched Julian's private study and found a receipt from a pharmacy in downtown Chicago for high-dosage sedatives I was never prescribed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Julian was drugging me to maintain the illusion of my dementia. I wasn't getting older. I was being slowly poisoned by my only child. Desperate for more answers, I contacted Elena, my former secretary who Julian had cruelly dismissed last December. We met in a crowded park where the wind whistled through the trees, mirroring my internal turmoil. She handed me a flash drive containing recorded conversations from the executive board meetings I had missed due to my illness. On the recording, I heard Julian's voice, cold and detached, telling the board that I had begun wandering the house at night, talking to people who weren't there. He was systematically dismantling my reputation, brick by brick, while I sat sedated in my armchair upstairs. The betrayal felt like a jagged shard of glass twisting in my gut. Elena's most devastating revelation concerned a man named Dr. Eris Thorne, the cousin of Julian's lawyer. Julian had paid this corrupt medical professional a consultation fee of $50,000 on March 20, 2025. In exchange, Eris had signed a secret medical affidavit stating that I was a danger to myself and others. This document was the final key Julian needed to bypass my power of attorney and take total control of the remaining $40 million. I realized that within weeks, I could be forcibly removed from my home and locked away in a high-security psychiatric ward. The walls of my beautiful estate suddenly felt like the cold bars of a prison. The scale of the financial ruin expanded when Henderson discovered that Sterling Logistics itself was being used as collateral. Julian had signed for a $25 million high-interest loan from a predatory lending group known as Vanguard Equity on April 15th. To secure the funds, he had forged my corporate seal on a document that pledged the entire trucking fleet and our main warehouse as security. If the loan wasn't repaid by the end of the fiscal quarter, the company I built over 50 years would be seized and liquidated. Julian wasn't just stealing my cash. He was burning the very foundation of the Sterling Empire to satisfy his own desperate creditors. My niece Sarah, the only person I still dared to trust, became a pawn in this deadly game when she noticed the surveillance. On the evening of May 10th, she found a hidden pinhole camera disguised as a smoke detector in my bedroom, directly above my bed. Julian wasn't just monitoring my finances, he was watching my every move, recording my most private moments to find any clip he could edit to prove my confusion. The invasion of my privacy felt like a second violation of my soul, making me feel naked in my own sanctuary. I realized that every tear I shed for Martha was likely being archived on a server for my son's amusement. The risk to my life became undeniable when I overheard a hushed conversation between Julian and Marcus Thorne in the Rose Garden. They were discussing the final transition scheduled for June 1st, a date less than 3 weeks away. Thorne whispered that the dosage needed to be increased to ensure I wouldn't cause a scene when the authorities arrived to transport me. My son didn't even hesitate before agreeing, his voice flat and devoid of any paternal love or basic human empathy. He was willing to risk a fatal overdose just to make his path to my fortune a little smoother. I was no longer his father. I was merely a stubborn obstacle in his way. The discovery of a hidden safe in Julian's office provided the final, most disturbing piece of this conspiracy. Inside, we found a life insurance policy taken out in my name only 4 months ago, with a payout of $15 million in the event of an accidental death. This is where the story takes a turn so dark that I must warn you before we continue. What I am about to reveal next is deeply disturbing and involves a plot against my life that I barely escaped. If you are sensitive to themes of elder abuse or planned violence, you might want to stop watching now. The truth behind my son's final plan is coming in 30 seconds. Henderson's screen flickered with a cold blue light as he hit the final keystroke, revealing the digital skeleton of the Sterling legacy. My breath hitched when the true nature of the charity materialized. It was never a non-profit organization, but a private equity account registered in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary name listed wasn't a group of veterans or orphans, but Julian Sterling himself, listed as the sole owner and executive controller of every cent. My stomach did a violent somersault as the technical reality hit me. My son hadn't just mismanaged the inheritance, he had surgically extracted it. Every dollar I thought was going to save lives was actually funding his high-stakes gambling and his secret penthouse. The room began to spin as I stared at the confirmation that Julian was the shadow behind the $80 million theft. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my chest, a physical manifestation of a heart breaking in real time under the weight of this absolute betrayal. The technical audit showed that the authorization codes were generated using my own biometric data, while I was heavily sedated by those vitamins. My son didn't just want my money. He wanted to transform me into a living ghost, a legal non-entity while he feasted on the remains of my empire. Seeing his name on that beneficiary line was like watching him pull a trigger while smiling at me over dinner. Suddenly, 2 moments from the past rushed back with a sickening new clarity that made my skin crawl with retroactive terror. I remembered the 2015 birthday card where he asked me to sign with a very thick pen, and the way he insisted on filming my confused moments for a family archive. He wasn't preserving memories. He was harvesting my signature and building a digital library of my drug-induced fog to prove my insanity. The love I felt for him then now tasted like copper and bile in my mouth. I looked at Martha's brooch, feeling a desperate, conflicting urge to protect her son while wanting to burn his world to the ground. The melancholic father who had been grieving his wife died in that library, and the ruthless CEO of Sterling Logistics finally took command. I closed the blue leather folder with a decisive, heavy thud that sounded like a coffin lid sealing Julian's fate forever. I turned to Henderson and gave the one order I never thought I would issue. Prepare the legal ambush for tomorrow's board meeting. I realized that my kindness had been his greatest weapon, but my survival would now be his ultimate downfall. Before I step into that room to face my own blood for the final time, I need to know you are still standing with me. Are you still watching and ready for the confrontation? The boardroom at Sterling Logistics was cold, smelling of floor wax and corporate betrayal, as Julian sat at the head of the table. I walked in with Mr. Henderson and Detective Miller, who was dressed in a civilian suit to remain unnoticed until the trap snapped shut. Julian smiled that oily smile, adjusted his silk tie, and asked if I was feeling lucid enough to sign the guardianship papers. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the blue audit report 404 in front of him, the gold seal catching the morning light like a predator's eye. The silence stretched for 10 seconds as Julian's confidence began to leak out of his pores like sweat. "Dad, we've discussed this. Your mind is playing tricks again," Julian whispered, his voice dripping with that fake, calculated concern intended to gaslight me. He laughed nervously, looking around the room at the board members, claiming I was obsessed with a clerical error that didn't exist in reality. I leaned forward, the CEO in me silencing his lies with a single icy stare that I hadn't used since the merger of 1998. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, sliding a tablet across the mahogany surface that displayed the live IP tracking from Julian's secret Chicago penthouse. The digital trail was undeniable, linking every single charity transfer to Julian's personal cryptocurrency wallet at precisely 2:15 p.m. every day. Julian's face transformed from a mask of virtue into a gargoyle of pure, unadulterated resentment as he realized the evidence was insurmountable. He stood up so quickly his chair flipped backward, the crash echoing through the silent boardroom like a gunshot in a tomb. "I deserved that money more than those pathetic veterans," he screamed, his voice cracking with years of suppressed bitterness and entitlement. He confessed to everything, shouting that I was a tyrant who cared more about trucks than his own son's happiness or financial survival. He admitted to the drugging, the forged signatures, and the fake medical affidavits, claiming he was simply taking what he was owed for being my shadow. Detective Miller stepped out of the shadows, her silver badge gleaming with a cold authority that finally silenced Julian's manic, desperate ranting. She placed her hand on his shoulder, the metal of the handcuffs clicking shut with a finality that resonated deep within my weary soul. As she read him his Miranda rights, the board members watched in stunned silence, their respect for the sterling name crumbling into dust. Julian looked at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, pathetic terror, begging me to stop this misunderstanding for the sake of Martha's memory. I turned my back on him, realizing that the man I raised died long before he ever touched my bank accounts. The justice that followed was not symbolic. It was a surgical removal of Julian and Marcus Thorne from the society they had exploited. Judge Harrison sentenced my son to 25 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, wire fraud, and the attempted drugging of a senior citizen. Marcus Thorne saw his legal license permanently revoked and received 15 years for his role as the architect of the financial massacre. Every cent of the stolen $80 million was ordered to be returned to the estate, along with the seizure of Julian's penthouse. The court-ordered liquidation of Julian's assets began immediately, ensuring that his life of unearned luxury was over, replaced by the cold reality of a prison cell. I stood on the courthouse steps as Julian was loaded into the transport van, the flashing blue lights reflecting off my wife's pearl brooch. The defeat was complete and irreversible, a public execution of a legacy that had been rotted from the inside out by greed. Elena and Sarah stood by my side, their presence providing a quiet strength as the media cameras captured the fall of a prince. I felt a strange, hollow peace, knowing that the empire was safe, but the father in me was permanently scarred. I watched the van disappear into traffic, knowing that justice had been served, but the cost was a hole in my heart that no money could fill. 6 months have passed since the heavy doors of the federal prison swallowed Julian's future, leaving me to rebuild the ruins of a life I thought was over. I sold the cold, massive estate and moved into a quiet cottage near the Atlantic, where the salt air cleanses the lingering scent of betrayal from my lungs. Every morning at 5, I still brew my bitter coffee, but now I do it for Sarah and the heroes at the Sterling Legacy Foundation. I donated the recovered $80 million to veterans who actually bled for this country, finally fulfilling Martha's silent wish for a meaningful legacy. I still carry her pearl brooch, a constant witness to my hard-won survival. You know, they say you can't take money to the grave, and they are right. But you do take your character. To anyone out there struggling with a family member who sees you as a bank account rather than a human, listen closely. Your legacy isn't the number in your ledger. It is the truth you stand for. I now realize my own silence once fed Julian's greed. God says what is done in the dark will always come to the light. Today, the light of financial integrity is blinding. If you have ever been betrayed by those you loved, please comment, share, and subscribe. Disclaimer: this story is inspired by real events, but certain names and elements are fictionalized.